Well, welcome to the Holy Week Reflection Series, and my name is Kenny. I'm one of the pastors here at First Presbyterian Church, and we are privileged that you've allowed us to join you on this final week through Jesus' life as we approach Good Friday and, of course, our Easter celebration on Sunday. Most people don't know what are going to be the circumstances or the timing of their death, and that's what makes Jesus' suffering and his crucifixion so unique. Being fully God and fully man, although that's an incredible mystery to us that we'll never totally comprehend, it did mean that he fully understood what was lying ahead of him in the days of this final week. And he had all those details before him. And so one of the things that we're watching as we do some of these readings is we're realizing that knowledge that Jesus had about the details of his suffering and his death, it began to weigh on him as we get into the days of this final week. And one of the passages that we get to look at for today's reading was John chapter 12. And this is one of those situations where we get to see that several days before Jesus is actually crucified, what he's anticipating is really weighing heavy on his heart. And so the reading today begins with what seems like a pretty inconsequential request that's made. So some Greeks who had traveled to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover had heard about Jesus in some way. They probably heard about his miracles and his teaching, and so they come to Philip, one of the disciples, and they request a meeting. They just say, hey, can you get us in front of Jesus to meet him? Well, Philip then goes and finds Andrew, and then Andrew and Philip go to Jesus, and they say, hey, listen, these Greeks who have traveled here would like to meet with you. And at that moment, Jesus then goes into probably one of the most intimate and lengthy self-reflections about his death. And the question is, why? Most Bible scholars believe that it's probably because there were these prophecies in the book of Isaiah that talked about a time when people would come from faraway lands, and they included the Greeks in this prophecy, that they would all make their way to Jerusalem to hear about the new thing that God was doing as he continued to work his salvation plan. So that's probably what's happening. So when Jesus hears that the Greeks have finally come and they've requested time with him, he realizes that now is the time, that his hour had come. Throughout the Gospels, he's been saying, my time is not yet come, not yet, not yet, not yet. And then finally, in this moment, for some reason, he says, the hour has come. And then he begins to reflect on his impending death. And in the passage, as you read it today, you hear him reflecting about it by when he says, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. And so Jesus he's reminding his own heart about the goodness of his death, how necessary it is. He understands unless the kernel dies, it can't give away the inherent life that's within it. And Jesus knows that he can't rescue us without giving up his own life. But then he goes on. And he says, now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this reason that I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. And so I just want to offer you two things to reflect on and to encourage you as you read this passage. The first is the troubled heart of Jesus. It's this incredible moment of vulnerability and transparency when Jesus says, my heart is troubled. And of course, the question is, what's troubling his heart? Well, once again, we know he already can see what's about to happen in the next few days. His best friends are going to betray him. They're going to abandon him at his time of crisis. He then is going to enter all night worth of trials and mock trials where he's being accused of all sorts of things. Then he's going to be beaten by the Roman soldiers. He's going to be stripped and publicly humiliated. And then ultimately he's going to be led outside of the city onto a trash heap, and he's going to be crucified on the cross. So certainly all that is playing through his mind, and that's why his heart's troubled. But there's also something else. This John 12 passage, one thing I love about it is it shows you the intimate relationship that Jesus had with his Father. And he'd had it from all eternity. And yet, Jesus understands that as he's on the cross and he's taking on our shame and our guilt and our sin, that the Father is ultimately going to punish him, as if he was the one who was guilty of all that sin. He will feel forsaken by the one who has loved him from all eternity. And so that's why his heart is troubled, because of my sin and because of your sin and because of the sins of the world. And so he has this huge weight on his shoulders, and his response is perfectly human. His heart was troubled. And that's important because the depth of his suffering is the measure of how much he loves us. And this moment of vulnerability reveals both of those things, which leads me to the second and to the last thing that we want to reflect on in this passage, and that is the sweetest no ever spoken in all of history. I mean, Jesus had asked himself, should I ask the Father to save me from this hour? And he immediately says, no, it was for this reason that I came to this hour. Jesus said no to himself so that he could say yes to us. He was aware of his emotions. Once again, this is very vulnerable, it's very transparent, he's very intimate. He's aware of his emotions, but he does not let his emotions control him. Instead, the only thing that is controlling Jesus in these moments is his love for us and his obedience to his Father. So today, if you doubt his love, if you think your sins are too many or too dark to be forgiven for him to love you, if you feel like you've kind of drifted a little bit and let your love for God grow a little bit cold, then as you read this passage, listen to the troubled heart of Jesus and just be aware of the cost of his love and hear him say no to himself so that he can say yes to you and to me. I want to leave you with this quote that I found by a pastor named Jack Miller. He's passed away at this time, but he used to say to his congregation, cheer up. You're a worse sinner than you ever dared imagine, and you're more loved than you had ever dared hope. That's good news. Amen.